Close the bathroom door, and you've got maybe 6 seconds before the scratching starts. That's not a joke. People who live with these dogs talk about it like a charming feature, but think about what it actually means. Your dog cannot tolerate being in a separate room from you. Cannot. Not prefers not to. Cannot. The breed was built to stick to one person. Carl Doberman wanted a guard dog that would follow him on his tax collecting rounds. Yeah, that's the actual origin. A tax collector who wanted a bodyguard with paws. So they bred for hyper-attachment. That's the whole point of the breed. And then people get one and act surprised when it follows them to the kitchen, the couch, the shower, the grave. And the Velcro thing doesn't stay cute. It turns into separation anxiety, which turns into destructive behavior, which turns into a crate full of drool and a chewed-up doorframe. If you work in an office, if you travel, if you have any life that involves leaving the house for 6 hours at a stretch, this is going to be a problem. Not might be, will be. Calling it neediness misses the point. The dog was built for this. You signed up for it when you brought one home, and pretending otherwise is how dogs end up in rescue at 14 months. Roughly half of all Dobermans will develop dilated cardiomyopathy. Half. That's not a worst-case scenario. That's the baseline. The big European study put the number closer to 60%. DCM is when the heart muscle gets weaker and thinner and bigger until it can't pump properly. The dog seems fine, goes for walks, eats, plays, sleeps, and then drops dead, or has a fainting episode that turns out to be the first sign of a heart that's been failing for 2 years without anyone knowing. The genetics behind this are messy. There's a gene called PDK4 that the American researchers identified, and another the European researchers identified. And some dogs have both, and some dogs have neither and still die of it, which means even buying from the most careful breeder doing every test doesn't guarantee anything. It improves your odds. It doesn't fix the problem. Average age at diagnosis is around 7.5. Average survival after diagnosis, depending on the stage, is maybe a year or 2. So the dog you're picking up at 8 weeks old, there's a real chance you're holding a dog that won't see 10, and you have to make peace with that before you bring one home, not after. £245 per square inch. Some sources say higher, some say lower. The methodology on these studies is honestly all over the place, but 245 is the number that gets cited. For comparison, your jaw maxes out around 120, so the dog can bite roughly twice as hard as you, and unlike you, has been selected to actually do it. What people miss is the working purpose. This breed wasn't developed as a companion. It was developed to intimidate, and when intimidation didn't work, to neutralize the threat. That's the job. Modern Dobermans have been softened, sure. The temperament's been pulled toward family-friendly for decades. The show lines are visibly different from the working lines. But you cannot breed out 140 years of selection in 3 generations of suburban living. The dog in your kitchen eating peanut butter off a spoon, looking at you with those big honey eyes, that dog has the equipment and the instinct to seriously hurt a person. Not theoretically, actually. Most owners never see it because most situations never call for it. But the moment a stranger reaches over a fence too fast, or a kid runs at the dog wrong, the loving family pet and the working protection breed are the same animal. They were always the same animal. You just hadn't met the second one yet. Six months in, the cute puppy phase ends. 8 months in, the dog is taller than your coffee table and developing opinions about who runs the house. 12 months in, the dog you trained, patiently, carefully, with treats and consistency, pretends not to know its own name in the middle of a busy park. This is adolescence. Every dog goes through it. Dobermans go through it like a wrecking ball. The hormones kick in. The brain rewires itself. And for roughly 18 months, you have a 70-pound animal with the impulse control of a teenager and the physical capacity of an adult dog. Countersurfing, resource guarding showing up out of nowhere, reactivity to other dogs that wasn't there at 6 months, recall going out the window. The thing they used to do happily, like getting in the crate, becomes a 45-minute negotiation. This is when most rehoming happens, not at 8 weeks when the puppy is small and chewing shoes, at 14, 16, 18 months, when the dog is enormous and seemingly unmanageable, and the owner is exhausted, and the dog ends up on a Facebook group with the caption, "Needs an experienced home." You either grit your teeth and train through it, or you become one of those owners. Those are the two outcomes. Pick now. State Farm will cover you. USAA? Usually fine. Allstate kinda depends on which agent picks up, but try getting a quote from Farmers or Liberty Mutual, or honestly about a dozen of the bigger insurers. And the second the word Doberman comes out of your mouth, the conversation gets weird. The rep gets quiet. They start using phrases like underwriting guidelines. That's the polite way of saying no. And look, I get why people don't think about this until it's too late. You buy the dog, you bring it home, then 6 months later, your homeowner's policy comes up for renewal, and suddenly there's a problem. Or worse, you file a claim for something completely unrelated, a busted pipe, a kitchen fire, and the adjuster sees the dog in a photo and your whole policy gets reviewed. The numbers are kind of brutal. Dobermans show up on something like 8 or 9 of the major insurers' restricted lists. Some won't write a policy at all. Some will, but they'll exclude any liability for the dog, which means if your Dobie bites a kid in the front yard, that's coming out of your savings. Renter's insurance? Same deal, sometimes worse. And a lot of landlords will just see Doberman on the application and say no thanks. Your sister has a cat? You bring your Dobie over. They've met before, twice, no issues. Today, the cat bolts across the living room because somebody dropped a spoon, and your dog is on it in less than a second. That's not a bad dog. That's a working breed doing exactly what working breeds were built to do. The Doberman was developed as a guard and protection dog, sure, but baked into that wiring is a serious chase instinct. Some lines are worse than others, the European working lines especially. American show lines tend to be calmer, but tends to is doing a lot of work in that sentence. You don't actually know what your specific dog has in it until something small moves fast in front of it. And this is where people get themselves in trouble. They raise the puppy with the cat. The puppy and the cat are best friends. They sleep curled up together, so the owner assumes the prey drive thing doesn't apply. Then the dog hits about 18 months, sometimes 2 years, and the wiring switches on. The cat doesn't survive that switch. Neither do most small dogs at the dog park. And you knew somewhere in your gut that this could happen. It's a spinal condition, compression of the spinal cord up in the neck. Cervical vertebral instability is the technical name, and your dog starts walking like it's drunk, hence the name, Wobbler. They sway in the back end, they knuckle their paws, they have trouble on stairs, and it shows up most often in middle-aged Dobermans, like 4 to 7 years old, right when you've gotten really attached. Estimates are kind of all over the place, but Dobermans are massively overrepresented in the diagnoses. Something around 5% of the breed will develop it, and that's probably low because mild cases get missed for years. Now here's where it gets frustrating. A lot of breeders won't talk about this. They'll happily show you the cardiac screening for DCM, they'll have hip scores, they'll tell you their lines are clean. But ask about wobblers and watch them get vague. The honest ones will tell you it's tough to screen for, because you can't really see it on imaging until the dog is already showing symptoms. Treatment? Surgery sometimes. Steroids and rest more often. Both are kind of a coin flip on whether your dog walks normally again. And the surgery, if you go that route, is somewhere around $5,000 to $7,000 depending on where you live. "2 hours a day, minimum. And that's not 2 hours of letting the dog sniff around the backyard while you check email. That's actual exercise. A long walk with hills, or a real run that gets the heart rate up. Mental work counts too. Scent games, training drills that make them think. Skip a day and you'll know. Skip 2 and the couch is in trouble. These are working dogs, and a Doberman without a job is going to invent one, and you're not going to like the job they pick. The sneaky part is the mental side. People think they can throw the ball for an hour and call it done. Doesn't work. A Doberman that's been physically tired but mentally bored is somehow more annoying than one that hasn't moved at all. They start staring at you, they start vocalizing. After a while, they're stealing the remote off the coffee table just to see what happens. And the breed is smart enough, like top 5 smart, that they figure out what gets a reaction and then do that thing on purpose for fun. Winter's brutal if you live somewhere cold. Their coats are basically tissue paper. Below about 40 degrees, they don't want to be outside, but they still need the exercise. So now you're problem solving in your living room. You walk a Doberman down a regular suburban street, and people behave like a wolf got loose. Joggers cross to the other side. The neighbor who waves at every other dog suddenly finds something fascinating on her phone. Kids get yanked back by the elbow, and the dog hasn't done anything. The dog is just existing, maybe sniffing a hydrant. Look, the silhouette is the problem. That lean, ink-black outline with the pointed face and the ears, if they're cropped, and the way they hold themselves, like they're standing at attention even when they're bored. Hollywood spent 50 years using this dog as shorthand for the bad guy owns it. Resident Evil, every drug dealer in every 90s movie, that scene in The Omen. You can't out-train pop culture. You just can't. And owners say the same thing over and over. Uber drivers cancel, landlords say no before you finish the sentence, insurance companies put the breed on a list with pit bulls and Rottweilers and jack the premium or refuse you outright. Your homeowner's policy might literally not cover you, so what you're actually buying is a reputation that walks 10 feet ahead of you everywhere you go, forever. A Doberman puppy gets its tail cut off at 3 or 4 days old, usually with no anesthesia, sometimes with surgical scissors, sometimes with a rubber band that cuts off blood flow until the tail just falls off. The breeder will tell you the puppies don't feel it because their nervous systems aren't developed yet. That's not true. We've known it's not true for a while. Newborn mammals feel pain. They just can't tell you about it. Ear cropping happens later, around 8 to 12 weeks, under anesthesia, which is the slightly better part. Then comes months of posting, taping the ears upright with cones and supports so they heal standing up instead of flopping over. If you don't post correctly, the ears go wrong, and you live with that. The dog lives with that. And the justification for any of it? Honestly, there isn't a good one. The old line was that cropped ears prevented infections and the docked tail prevented injuries in working dogs. Modern vet science says, basically, no. Most of Europe banned both procedures years ago. Dobermans there look like Dobermans, with floppy ears and a tail. They're fine. It's done because people think it looks meaner. That's the whole thing. Roughly 58% of Dobermans will develop dilated cardiomyopathy in their lifetime. 58. That's not a worst-case stat from one bad study. That's the consensus number from the European veterinary cardiology data. The heart muscle gets thin and floppy, can't pump right, and the dog either goes into heart failure or just drops. Sudden cardiac death, no warning. A 6-year-old dog playing fetch 1 minute, gone the next. And here's what gets me. The breed has been like this for decades. Everybody in the breeding world knows. There's a screening test, the Holter monitor, that catches early warning signs. Responsible breeders run it on their dogs every year and pull anything affected from their breeding program. Most breeders don't. Stack the rest on top. Von Willebrand's disease, which is basically canine hemophilia. Wobbler syndrome, where the spine compresses the spinal cord and the dog loses coordination in the back legs. Hip dysplasia, hypothyroid, a cancer rate that's just ugly. The average lifespan for the breed is 9 to 10 years, sometimes less. That's the trade. This is a working dog, built to bite, built to chase down a guy running across a field at midnight. Carl Friedrich Louis Doberman was a tax collector in 1880s Germany who needed something that would intimidate people on his collection rounds and back him up if things got physical. That's the original brief. A century and a half of breeding has softened the edges, but the wiring is still there underneath. So when somebody who's never owned a dog before, or who owned a beagle once in college, decides their first real dog is going to be a Doberman, what tends to happen is predictable. The dog hits adolescence around 8-9 months. It's 80 pounds of muscle. It's smarter than the owner's giving it credit for. It starts testing every boundary it can find. And the owner, who's been winging it on YouTube videos, suddenly has a teenage land shark in their living room. I'm not saying you can't do it. People learn. But Dobermans don't really do learning curve. They do you're in charge or I am. Pick one. And if you pick wrong, you end up rehoming the dog at 14 months, which is, honestly, most of how Dobermans end up in rescue. You find the puppy, you put down the deposit, and then you start looking at apartments, and yeah, whole different problem. A lot of rentals straight up will not let you have a Doberman. Doesn't matter how well behaved, doesn't matter the temperament test, doesn't matter the letter from the trainer. The breed name on the lease, that's the end of the conversation. Most places use blanket aggressive breed lists, and Dobermans are pretty much always on them, right up there with Pits and Rotties. Insurance is the next wall. Homeowners policies can either jack your premium or refuse coverage outright. State Farm's been okay about it, but plenty of others, Allstate, Farmers, Nationwide, they'll deny or non-renew you the second they find out, and you're supposed to disclose. Lying about your dog to your insurer is a fun way to have no coverage right when you need it. Then the actual bans. Parts of Germany, ironic given that's where the breed comes from, restrict Dobermans pretty heavily. Same in Spain, Italy, Singapore, parts of Australia. Even in the US, individual cities and military housing have restrictions. So before you bring one home, check the lease, check the policy, check the city, in that order. Look at the intake records at any Doberman rescue, and a pattern jumps out fast. Dogs between 8 months and 2 years. That's the bulk of them. Cute puppy phase ends, the actual dog shows up, and the owner realizes they bought a project, not a pet. The reasons cycle through the same handful. Too much energy, bit my nephew when he pulled her ear, we had a baby, he won't stop chewing the couch, separation anxiety, and the neighbors are complaining. Almost none of those are the dog's fault. They're the result of someone watching a John Wick movie and deciding they need that energy in their living room without doing any of the homework. The rescues themselves are stretched thin. Doberman Rescue of the Triad, Illinois Doberman Rescue Plus, they're running at capacity basically always. Foster homes are tapped out, and Dobermans don't always show well in shelters because the stress of the kennel makes a sensitive breed look unstable, and they get passed over for friendlier-looking dogs, which is why a lot of rescues won't even take owner surrenders anymore. They just don't have the room. The dog ends up in county animal control, and then, yeah, you can guess. Working intelligence is the trait everyone wants on the brochure and nobody actually wants in their kitchen. Dobermans rank 5th on the Corin list, which is a flawed ranking, but the general gist is right. They learn fast. They also learn things you didn't mean to teach them. The dog figures out the fridge has the cheese, figures out which click of the leash means walk and which means vet, and reacts accordingly. Learns that if it whines for 90 seconds, you cave on the couch rule. Congrats, you trained yourself. People walk into this thinking a long walk solves it. A long walk does basically nothing for a Doberman. A tired body with a bored mind is a body that just lies down and stares at the wall, plodding. You need actual mental work. Scent games, obedience drills, the whole enrichment thing the trainer YouTube channels won't shut up about. 40 minutes a day minimum on top of physical exercise. And it has to be consistent. Skip a few days because work got busy, and the dog will invent its own job. That job is usually renovate the baseboards or reorganize the trash. Smart breeds don't tolerate boredom. They industrialize it. The breed got nicknamed Velcro dog for a reason, and the reason is not cute. It's that they form an intense attachment to one or two people and treat any absence like abandonment. Not all of them, but enough that it shows up in the breed surveys. Mild version, the dog cries at the door for 10 minutes and settles. Moderate version, chewed shoes and shredded doors, maybe a puddle in the hallway. Severe version is you come home to a dog with bloody claws because it tried to dig through the door, drywall ripped out to 3 feet up, and a neighbor leaving a note about the screaming. That's not made up. That's a pretty standard rescue form story. Crating helps some dogs and makes it dramatically worse for others. A panicking Doberman in a crate will break teeth, tear off nails. Some end up needing actual surgery. So the easy fix isn't actually easy. The honest fix is desensitization protocols, sometimes meds, sometimes a daycare arrangement, and a frank look at whether you have the kind of life that lets you not leave a dog alone for 9 hours. A lot of people don't. They just don't realize it till the drywall's gone. $2,500 for a puppy from a breeder who tests for DCM, von Willebrands, hips, thyroid. Could be 3, could be 4 if the lines are nice. And that's the cheap part. DCM, dilated cardiomyopathy, affects something like 58% of Dobermans in some studies. 58. So the responsible thing is yearly cardiac screening. A Holter monitor runs $300 to $500. An echocardiogram with a cardiologist, another $500 to $700. Every year from age 3 or so onward. Pet insurance for a Doberman? Pricier than average because the underwriters know what's coming. Expect $60 to $100 a month for decent coverage, and they'll often exclude pre-existing cardiac stuff if you wait too long to enroll. Food is large breed quantities, so figure $80 to $120 a month if you're feeding something halfway decent. Then the surprises. Bloat surgery, if it happens, runs $5,000 to $7,000. Torn cruciate ligament, $4,000 to $6,000. Cardiac event? Who knows? People budget for the puppy and forget the dog comes attached to a $15,000 minimum over its lifetime, probably more like $25,000. And that's if nothing goes wrong, which statistically, it will.